Hello, hello, welcome, 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 welcome. Welcome to our special class today. We are going to be painting some very loose, expressive, and fun florals today for all skill levels. So whether you're a beginner or you've painted for a little while already, this is the place for you for the next hour, and I am so glad that you're here. So where are you watching from? This is live on Facebook and live on YouTube. Let me know where you're watching from. Let me know if you can see me okay and hear me okay, and if everything is running smoothly. My name is Alex Kincaid. If this is your first time painting with me, hello. I'm a botanical watercolor artist, and I teach tons and tons of people how to love painting flowers. We do all kinds of floral lessons. Sometimes we do realistic pieces, like this rhododendron. That was really fun. And sometimes we do just loose, easy breezy ones to relax and to have fun. As long as it's floral and watercolor, we are all about that here. So welcome. If today is your first time teaching and learning and painting with me, let me know in the comments. I would love to welcome you. And I also have some really wonderful people on my team helping out in the chat too. So if you have any questions, if you're looking for a specific link, they can help you out. That is Rachel and Sandy and Crystal. So you're gonna see their names popping up in the live chat as well. All right, I see Lauren watching from Oklahoma City. Oh, thank you, Susan. Susan said you're the best teacher. I appreciate it. I am a self-taught watercolor artist, and I think that it helps me have a little advantage when I'm teaching because I learned to paint starting in 2016. So I still remember exactly what it's like to pick up your paintbrush for the first time and not have any idea what to do with it and have no idea how to get your paints from the palette onto the paper. So we go through things in a very logical step-by-step way around here. All right, I see Mary in Cape Cod. Who else is here? Teresa said first time beginner. Leslie Claire said first time live. Carol said first time here. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Okay, so today let's talk about what we're gonna do and what you're gonna need. You're gonna need basic watercolor supplies, and I've actually designed these 3 flowers I'm gonna teach you specifically so that any skill level can do it, any supplies will work. Now, if you have questions about supplies, I do have a full and complete clickable supply page on my website. So I'll have somebody on my team stick that in the chat so you can check it out. You don't need any fancy supplies today though. You need some paints, you need a couple brushes, they could be any shape, and you need some watercolor paper. And of course, water and paper towels. And if you're like me, a lot of paper towels because sometimes things get messy, okay? What we're gonna do today is paint 3 simple watercolor flowers. Now these flowers are designed so that if you're a total beginner, you can paint them, but also if you've been painting for a while and you just need some inspiration on floral elements to add into your paintings, you can use these, take them and run with them. I'm gonna be talking about how you can take them from the really simple version I show, make them a little bit more complicated, change a couple variables, and you can use them in your pieces. So I actually grabbed a few paintings before class just a few minutes ago because I wanted to show you how you can use some of the things I'll teach you today. You can make really beautiful wreaths out of these flowers. Just slowly start to combine them over and over again, going around in a circle. You make really pretty wreath. You can add some of the simple flowers that you see here into a bouquet, and it adds a lot of this nice kind of filler and fluff, these floral elements that make things look really good. Here's another example of a wreath. It's a little bit different. Some of the things I'll show you can be just standalone paintings like this one. You know, you could cut that out, mat it, frame it. You could make a bookmark out of it or gift tags and give it away. Or you can combine some of the shapes into a more complicated kind of composition. I like this because sometimes I like to do things in mini and then really big. So you can do a couple different things with those. So those are just inspiration, some ideas for how you can use the flowers I'm going to teach you how to paint today in a bigger composition as a gift or as a painting or just to relax and have fun. All right, I think we are pretty much ready to go. So let me flip my camera around here and we'll get our workspace all set up together and we're going to start painting. Let me put these away. Okay. All right, so these are 3 versions of the flowers we're going to paint today. And I want them to be simple because one of the sticking points when you're first starting painting, but even if you've been painting for a while and you just kind of lose the inspiration or you lose some of that drive that you had at the very beginning, one of the things that's hard is just to know what to paint, right? We want to pick up our brush, we want to make beautiful colors and put beautiful things on paper, but there's so many barriers to that, right? I can't mix the right color, or I don't know what brush to use, or I'm not sure what to paint. So we're gonna keep it simple and manageable today. And I actually recorded a little time lapse of me painting these, and I'm gonna play it for you right now. It's only about 20-30 seconds long because it's going to show you a little bit of the process that we're going to do, and we're going to be painting these today in different colors so that you can see how changing little variables is really important. So let me pull up this time. Okay, so you can see I'm mixing up the color, and the first one that we're going to talk about today is stamping flowers. So when we stamp flowers, we're not really worried about getting the perfect paintbrush strokes. We're just worried about getting the paint on the paper and making some shapes with it. Here you can see making some little half fan shapes and then a multi-stemmed version of a flower. Remember, with watercolor, we always are going back and adding layers when things dry. So I can go back and add darker elements to these. I can add a little bit more detail. And I think it's useful to see how things are painted in that really quick way, because that is going to help you know exactly what's coming up. So the very first thing we're going to start talking about today is stamping with our paintbrush. And this is just such an easy way to get started with watercolor, or if you feel like you're in a little bit of a creative rut and you're not sure what to do, this is a really fun little project. You can use any kind of brush for this, and I'm going to grab, this is a number 8 round. I'm going to put a little water in my palette here, and I'm going to grab, this is quinacridone magenta. It's a pink paint. If this is your first time painting with me, check out my other videos from the last couple weeks because we're building on them a little bit. About 3 weeks ago, I did a live where we went over all of the watercolor techniques that you'll hear me talk about today. So how do you get paint in the palette? How do you take the paint and put it on the paper? Wet into wet, wet on dry, a flat wash, all kinds of things that you're gonna hear me talk about. So I'm gonna mix this paint up here and roll my brush around in it. So the paintbrush is full of paint. And I'm gonna take it over here, and I'm not worried about any specific kind of brush stroke. We're just going to hold the brush and push it down on the paper just like that, okay? Anybody can do these flowers, and then we're slowly going to start stamping them around. Okay, if you can, rotate your paper as you go, because that's just going to be a lot easier for your hand. You can see now it's easier for me to get this angle. Okay, and we're just stamping those little flowers. Isn't that so simple? And yet, when you combine a whole bunch of them, or you do different colors, or let's just add some water to our paintbrush, and we can go right back in, and now we're going to have more of those flowers, but slightly different value. It's a little bit lighter, right? Because we added some water to it. And so you learn about your paints and your colors, even though you're doing something that's really simple, that's really easy. So this is kind of like a front-facing stamped flower, just like this, but we can also make it a little bit like a side perspective. So I can fill my brush back up here, and we can do just a few stamps as if we're seeing the flower from the side. Okay, and it's great when you're making a floral composition to have a few different perspectives in it, because it keeps the eye moving and it's a little bit more interesting. So this is just one paint, right? Now imagine how you could make that a little bit more complicated for a composition. You could change the size of your brush. So that's a number 8. Let me grab a number 4 here. Okay, I'm gonna grab that, spin it around, and if I just take a number 4 brush and start stamping, look, I have a totally different flower. The scale is different, right? And all I did was change the size of the brush. Well, what about changing the shape of the brush? So if you have a completely different shaped brush, like this is a filbert, so it's flat on the side, but it makes this kind of upside down U shape. We can fill that up with our paint, okay? And we have another kind of flower. Again, the only thing we've changed is our brush here, okay? And yet we get a totally different shape and look to our stamped flower. There's lots of different things you can do here, lots of different ways that you can incorporate variables. You can change the color and the size and the scale, and it's all gonna come together really beautifully. So hopefully that one as a starting point kind of blows your mind, because we have just watercolored some really pretty flowers. It took us about 2 minutes, and they're really pretty, and we can come back and add more detail. We could add stems or leaves or details in the center once it's dry with our wet on dry technique, and it's gonna be really, really pretty. Okay, so stamping flowers is a great one. How about ones that are a little bit more difficult, where we're actually making brush strokes and combining them together? So what I want you to think about as we go into this next floral shape is I want you to think about making this kind of fan shape with the flower, okay? One of the secrets to painting flowers without drawing ahead of time, without a lot of forethought or difficulty, is breaking things down into simple shapes, okay? So do you see this kind of fan shape on this flower? If you can hold that guideline in your mind as you start to paint, where you're putting the petals in down here in this sweeping arc, and then we're adding this big upside down U shape as the cone of the flower, you can put the different shapes together and build things so that it becomes a more complicated flower, but we know that it wasn't actually that complicated, okay? So let's do this one, and I'm gonna do it with yellow this time. So I'm gonna clean my brush off, put a little water over here in my palette, and I'm gonna use my nickel azo yellow here. So I'm grabbing some paint with my brush just by making some circles with my brush, some light pressure. Now my brush is full of pigment, and I can bring it over to the water here. If I want it to be a little bit lighter or a little bit thinner and looser, I can add some more water to it and mix it in really well. So here are the brush strokes we're gonna be using for this specific flower. We're gonna put the tip of our brush down and then push, and then come back up to the tip of our brush. And then we're gonna do the same thing, but we're gonna sweep the brush the other way and come back to the tip of our brush. So it makes a nice little flower petal. This brush stroke is a little bit harder than it looks like when you actually start doing it. So it looks really simple, but that's because I've made this brush stroke about 14 million times. So it just takes practice, okay? And you can make that brush stroke long and thin like that. Okay, you can change the petals, or you can make it a little bit shorter like this one. Okay, all of those are the same brush stroke. I'm just changing how much pressure I put on the brush and how long I make my brush stroke. All right, so if you practice those for a second, I'll show you something kind of fun here in these paintings that I grabbed. So you can see this flower here is using that same brush stroke. We are going thin to thick in the middle and back to thin, right? Thin to thick to thin. That's that same brush stroke there. Okay, well, this is also that same brush stroke, but it's a little bit thicker and a little bit wider here. Okay, so lots of different ways that you can do this. And then here we have another one, and it's that same brush stroke, but it's being used for all of these leaves in the wreath. Okay, so remember, anytime you learn something with watercolor, you can take that and use it in 100 different ways. So every time you take the time to learn something or to practice a technique or to practice a brush stroke, you're able to come together and use that in so many ways for all of your different paintings and compositions, which is really cool. So remember, holding that fan shape in your mind, let's combine these into a flower. And I'll do this a couple times, so I would recommend you just watch me do it first and then jump in and paint it with me. Okay, so I'm gonna start my petal over here. I'm gonna do probably 5 or 6 petals here. Okay, and I just slowly have them come together. You can do it from the top down to the bottom like this, or you can do it from the bottom over to the top. Doesn't matter how you're holding your brush as long as it's comfortable for you. My hand is anchored to the table, right? We talked about that posture of having your hand anchored to the table so that we have that stability, okay? And if you have any questions along the way, you can pop them in the chat and we'll collect them and answer them in a little bit. So here's our first one. Let's do another one, okay? Painting that petal shape. Just go nice and slow. And there's some things that are going to happen that are common when you first start doing this. So you might get some puddling with your brush strokes, a little pool of paint left behind. That's okay. It's all normal. It just takes practice. Remember, the better the paper is that you're painting on, the better your watercolor techniques are going to work. Okay, let's add a little bit of water to our yellow. And we can have one that's more diluted and a little bit brighter. Okay, so we'll do one more down here and we'll kind of face it in a little bit of a different direction. Okay, so start to think about the variables. If you did this with a different color, if you did it with a different size brush, if you did it with longer, thinner petals, every one of those changes is a whole new painting and a whole new flower. Learning how to adapt and create all of that variation in your paintings is a really, really good skill to have, okay? So we're gonna let this layer dry for a minute, because if we add our little cone on top of these flowers right away, it's gonna bleed into our petals. And sometimes bleeding into the petals can be really, really pretty, but sometimes we want it to have that distinctive area where it's not soaking into the rest of the petals. So we're gonna let that dry for a minute. We're gonna come over here and start to loosen up our green paint. So I have a clean, damp brush, and this is Hooker's Green. I'm gonna put it in my palette over here and add a little water to it. Now the brand of Hooker's Green paint I'm using is Core, Q-O-R, and it's a bit darker than some of the other brands of Hooker's Green, okay? Now, whether you're using a block of paper like I am, or sheets from a pad of paper, or a scrap of paper, or you're practicing maybe on the reverse side of a piece of paper, for today, it's okay. Use whatever you have, okay? Because we're understanding more about shapes and technique and colors and how to bring it all together. But remember, when you're painting a final project and when you're really practicing, it's a good idea to paint on the best watercolor paper you can afford. So I'm painting on a block of Arches paper. You can see it's Arches, and a block means that it's glued on all sides. That's what this black adhesive is on the side, and that kind of helps keep the paper flat, okay? So when you have a green paint mixed up, I'm gonna switch to a slightly smaller brush. This is my number 4 round, and I'm going to mix my green up again. Always mix in our paints in our palette so that they stay nice and cohesive and smooth for us. And I'm gonna spin my brush around in it because that gives me lots of paint on my brush and a really fine point. And this is a very intuitive thing. We're just gonna come in here and start painting some stems together, okay? They don't need to be straight. In fact, if they're completely straight, it's going to look a little bit weird. So you wanna have some motion to it. You wanna use your whole arm to paint. So I have my hand anchored to the table and I just pull my arm down the page, okay? Light pressure on my brush, and then we're gonna have some little gaps. So I'm leaving these gaps here. We're gonna fill those in. We have our branches, our stems kind of branching off of each other here. And let's see, I probably have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So you probably want about 15 or 20 different little stems coming up where we can put a little flower on the tips of them and in the gaps here. Clean my brush off again. What color should we paint this flower? We have a pink one, we have a yellow one. I think a purple would be really nice. So I'm gonna grab my purple here. And this is called Imperial Purple, this color. It's from Daniel Smith, and it's a mixture of ultramarine blue and quinacridone rose. So if you don't have a purple paint, you can mix your own. And remember, whenever you take a paint and you put it in your palette, you can also make it your own by adding a little bit of other colors to it and mixing it up yourself, okay? So we have this pretty purple paint here, and I'm gonna, again, spin my brush around, and we can combine these nice brush strokes we've done with some of the stamping that we did. So you can just put your brush strokes down, you know, 3 or 4, just like that. And you're going to be making this really pretty stem full of flowers. You can use different shape brushes. You can start to add brush strokes in and move your brush if you feel confident moving beyond the stamping. And we're just gonna drop these little brush strokes in at the end of each of our stems, okay? And in any of the gaps that we left. It's like, you know, there's a little gap here at the end of this one. And where could you use a flower like this? Well, I think it'd be really pretty in a bouquet, right? Wouldn't that be pretty? Kind of coming out from behind the other flowers. Okay, and whenever my brush starts to run out of paint, and you could tell it runs out of paint, let me show you how. Okay, if I'm painting like this, see how as I'm painting, there's more and more white spots coming through? I'm seeing the paper come through because I'm running out of paint on my brush. So as soon as I start to feel that, I go back over here, grab some more paint, give it a little spin to keep that nice fine point on it, and then come over here and start painting again. Okay. You put a few random little pieces here and there, like maybe there's some that are coming out from behind the stems that we can't see it all, okay? Give your viewer just a little bit of a clue that there's more going on than meets the eye, okay? All right, so we have at this point, and it hasn't even taken us very long, we have some really pretty stamped flowers here. We learned about how to use this brush stroke in a variety of ways so that we can make these flowers. And then we've made a full stem of flowers down here. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about with watercolor is the importance of layering. So we put our first layer down, we let them dry completely, and then we can go back in and add more detail. So I'm going to play that little time-lapse video again, and I want you to notice what's happening after the first layer. Okay, and when you notice something, pause for a second and let me know in the chat. I want to see if you notice it too. Okay, so again, this was from earlier today. I made this little time lapse. So those are our stamped flowers, our first layer. Okay, then we do our painted ones with that fan shape. Then we do our multi-stem flowers here. So that's our first layer. Now, what do you notice comes next in our subsequent layers? What are we doing? Okay. Start to look. Something that makes a painting pop, makes a painting just elevated, it makes it really look like you know what you're doing, is when you add contrast, when you add extra shapes and extra colors, and you create visual interest in your painting. So this looks great, okay? But it's gonna look even better when we add some contrast. I see in the chat, Robin said adding shadows. Yeah, so we talk about contrast or shadows. It's adding something dark and something light, because having those two things together makes things really, really pop. So here's our little compounded stem of flowers. What we're gonna do to make it even better is I'm gonna come back to my purple paint here and mix up a darker version of what I just created, okay? So here we have it right here. I can spin my brush around in it, and coming back in and adding a little bit of depth at the bottom of each of these. And guys, this is not a complicated thing here. I'm just doing quick little blob of dark paint. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. Okay, sometimes I'm doing a couple brush strokes on the bigger ones, just a little blob on the smaller ones. See how it already looks a little bit better? A little bit more refined, a little bit more finished, right? Because when we add layers, and we build in contrast, it's gonna make everything look a little better. We can even add some more contrast into the stems. So if I come back to my green, create a bit of a darker hooker's green, I don't have to go over all the stems, but I can just paint a couple that are a little bit darker just by painting some darker green on top of the lighter green. Very light pressure, barely touching the point of my brush to the paper, right? And see how it starts to make it look more finished and more interesting. Isn't that cool? We can add tiny little leaves with that same brush stroke too. Same brush stroke we did up here. Just very casually and very gently putting that in like so. Okay. And we don't get too hung up on perfection here. There is no perfection. We're not even painting a real flower, right? So just have fun. Have fun with it. So Annie said, is your light coming from the top? We're not even worried about that right now. Okay, eventually, of course, the more we paint, the more we need to understand where the light is coming from and how we build the shadows and highlights. But right now, we're just figuring out how do we add in some darker and some lighter. Now, in a watercolor like this one, Annie is completely correct. We need to think about where's the light coming from so that every time we add in a shadow on our leaves, or we have these are more highlighted and these are a little bit darker, okay? It's really important, but with something that's super loose and just for fun and relaxing, just get in the habit of adding light and dark. Now, a really good tip is to squint at your piece. And when you squint at it, you can kind of lose some of the definition, which is good, and just make sure you're seeing something dark, something light, highlights and shadows, okay? The more highlights and shadows we add into our piece, that contrast makes things look really good. All right, over here, let's talk about our cone flowers. I'm gonna grab some, I have burnt umber over here in my palette. I'm gonna grab some of that and bring it over, and it's a brown color, so you can use any kind of brown. Okay, just like that. I'm gonna add a little water to it, grab a little more paint. And all we're gonna do here is paint this upside down U shape. So again, if you just watch the first time, it's a little bit easier. So we're painting that upside down U and then filling it in to where it meets the yellow. And if you want to get a little bit fancier, you can add a few little spikes coming out of it too, like that. All right, grab our brown again, upside down U, okay. Fill it in down to where it meets the yellow. And tiny little brush strokes just to add those little spikes in. Okay, and we'll do this last one. Now, this is another spot where there's a lot of room for variation. So I'm going to show you again while that's drying and while you're painting it. Let me show you again how we can create variation and change in something. So this painting that I showed you earlier, it has wider and taller U shapes, right? So that's an option with no little prickly things coming out of them. This one has a much shorter and a more squat kind of cone. So instead of a full U, kind of cut your U in half, just do a little one here, and that's gonna be a different kind of cone flower. Okay, we have, let's see, this little guy has lots more petals and just a little yellow cone. So lots of different adaptations and variables are going to add a lot of visual interest to your paintings. Okay, gives you lots to work with. All right, I'm going to go back to my larger brush here. It's a number 8. You don't need the same brush, but I'm just going to grab a bigger one and grab my green paint. Okay, and now we're gonna add some stems in. So whenever I'm adding a stem in to a flower arrangement like this, the stem comes from the center of the flower. So you can hover your paintbrush over the center, start to pull your brush down without touching it to the paper. And as soon as you get to the white of the paper, you can drop your brush and then continue the arc of where that stem is, right? So again, I'm hovering over this flower, and then I can drop it again and come down like that. So we know the stem makes sense to the viewer where it's coming from. Okay, we can hover over the center and then create our stem just like that. Here's another one, like so. And with this bigger brush, I'm going to do this same brush stroke that we did up here again. And we're going to start adding our leaves in. See the paper coming through with that brush stroke? That means I need more paint on my brush. Okay, so just that same leaf shape, very simple, nothing complicated. And these brush strokes take practice, they take time. I recommend, if you haven't been familiar with these kind of brush strokes before, that you actually fill up a few pages with them, and you'll find yourself getting better and better as you go on. Okay. All right, we're gonna let these layers dry for a minute, and we're gonna come back up here. So we could make this into a little bouquet, little posy of all these flowers with the stems, or we could make it like this is a little full page composition. Okay, so I'm going to grab my green paint again, and instead of creating stems, this time I'm just going to have those leaf shapes come out from the sides. And I'm using the same brushes, okay? I have some workhorse brushes here, my pointed round brushes. I use them all the time. Probably for about 95% of what I paint, I'm using the same brush shape, the same brushes. This is still my number 8, but you can use bigger, smaller, whatever you have on hand, just to practice. Okay. You can add a little bit of contrast in again. So I grabbed a darker green paint so that we have a little contrast. Some of the leaves are bigger, some of them are smaller. Okay. I'm going to clean my brush off. Okay, rinse it off, dab it on the paper towel and put it down, and I'm going to come back to my number 4 brush. So again, a smaller one. What I want to do is take some dark paint. So I have some Payne's Gray over here in my palette. Put it right here. And with this darker paint, again, we want light and we want dark. We want light paint and we want dark paint. So up here, I have my dark gray paint on my brush. And I'm just going to make some dots in the center of these stamped flowers. Okay, little tiny dots, but again, something that's darker, adding detail. And when you joined me a couple weeks ago, we talked about wet on dry painting, and that's what this is, right? We're painting wet paint on dry paint, and it's a great way to add detail, dimension, depth to our whole painting. All right. Annie said, your hand is so steady. You know, it's just lots and lots of practice. And it's not always steady by itself, right? I usually am painting with my pinky anchored to the table because it gives us control. You don't want to be hovering above your page because that's when you start to kind of get shaky and lose control, okay? All right, so that was wet on dry with some little dots, some leaves. Well, we can do wet on dry with these flowers too. So I still have my yellow mixed up, and I'm just going to bring some of that brown paint into it just to darken it up a little bit. Even some of the green is fine. Don't be too worried about your colors. It's just about having fun and relaxing, okay? So I have this slightly darker paint now. I'm going to spin my brush through it. And remember this brush stroke we did, right? Where we went thin to thicker to thinner. Well, we're going to do a variation of that now. We're going to keep the middle slightly thinner, but it's still that same mechanics, right? It's still thin to thick to thin. And we're going to put that brush stroke onto our flower petals to give it a little bit more detail and shape. You can also leave them just like this and they look great. But if you want to add a little bit more, wet on dry, make sure those petals are totally dry before you start adding in lines like this. Okay. Thin to thick to thin. And I want you to remember that even though technically I've taught you 3 simple flowers today, these can be 100 different flowers. Change the brush you're using, change the color, change the scale. put them into a bouquet, put them into a wreath, make a bookmark with them or a gift tag, paint a card for somebody and pop it in the mail or a postcard. The options are endless. Once you know a few simple things to paint, once you understand a few ways that you can hold your brush or mix colors, and that it's all a little bit easier than it might have seemed before, you can paint so many things. You have so many options. Okay, so we added some details there. If I grab my darker green paint again with my brush, I can also add some details right onto the leaves, okay? Just like that. Same brush stroke, thin to thick to thin. Remember, if the first layers are still wet, it's going to move a little bit. So this one is still wet, that one was still wet. So we get this nice crisp line. If the first layer is dry, if it's still wet, it's gonna move and bleed. Now, that can be a stylistic choice if you want it to, okay? Or if you wanna wait for things to dry completely, that is good too. All right, so can you believe that? It's like in 30 minutes, 3 completely different kinds of flowers and endless possibilities with them. All right, I would love to hear from you in the chat. Do you have any questions? Do you have anything you'd like me to demonstrate again? Anything you'd like me to talk about? Any questions about watercolor supplies? I'm gonna have a sip of water real quick. Here's a tip for you. Make sure your drinking water has a lid on it. That's how you can avoid drinking the paint water, okay? All right, so if you need a demo of anything again, let me know. If you want me to show you any of the paint strokes again, the brush strokes, any ideas for how you can combine these things, let me know. I'm here to answer your questions. If you're watching the replay later, you can still put a question in the chat and we will come back and check and answer them. I love painting loose flowers. I actually have a workshop coming up. It's a 3-day workshop and it's free starting May 1st. And we're going to be painting all of these loose flowers together. Okay, and there's all kinds. We have chamomile and veronica, some mums, lots of little flowers here. So if you're interested in that, make sure you're on my newsletter list. I'll be sharing all the details about that. And my team will put the link for the newsletter sign up in the chat, okay? Make sure you're on the newsletter if you want details about that workshop. It's totally free. It's gonna be really fun. It's 3 days of live classes. Okay, let me check the questions here. I see there's some questions. Pooling. Okay, so can you address pooling? I'm guessing that you're talking about when you make these brush strokes. Let me grab a piece of paper here. Okay, so pooling happens for a few reasons, okay? And let me know if this is what you're talking about, but you kind of make your shape, right? Your stroke like this, and sometimes you get this pool of paint at the end of it, okay? Is that right? Happens for a few reasons. The first reason it happens is low quality paper. If you're using a cheaper or an inexpensive paper, it's just not gonna work really well. The second reason is if you have too much paint on your brush. So notice how I'm picking up the paint and I'm not taking any extra off when I come over here to paint this. So lots of extra paint and water are running off of my brush. Okay, so the third reason that the pooling can happen is when you pick your brush up, you're stopping first and then picking your brush up, which lets the paint run back off your brush. So you want to make sure to address all those things. Fill your brush up with paint, spin it around to get a fine point, and then you can scrape it on the palette if you have too much, or even if you just touch it to a clean spot on your palette, see how much extra paint comes off? And then you want to have steady speed and pick your brush up and don't stop moving, okay? So you don't want to stop your brush, you want to push down, come back up without moving, okay? And you can combine those strokes together to make all kinds of different things. It's easier on high quality paper as well, okay? So I'm using high quality 100% cotton great artist quality paper, you want to make sure that you use good quality paper when you're painting. What else? What else would you like to know? Megan said, I think my issue is that the first layer is so dark already. So Megan, you've actually just done something that is so hard to teach, but it is the thing to help you become a better artist, which is observing what you've done so that you can make a tweak going forward. I think it's so great to teach. You need to observe something, right? So I can observe maybe, observe this, right? When I put the darker paint back in here, that first layer wasn't completely dry, so it bled a little bit. If I don't want that to happen, I know I need to wait longer next time. As long as every time you're learning something from your painting, that painting is a success. That should be the goal, really. Every time you paint, you learn something and you bring it to your next painting. So if your first layer is too dark, make sure you're adding more water to your paint, and that's going to help you improve that a little bit easier. And then you can add the darker paint to create more contrast. Okay. Okay, let's see what else. Rhonda said thin to thick again for leaves, please. Okay, well, I have a YouTube lesson just about leaves that we can share with you. And again, it just takes a lot of practice, but let's just go over it again. So my brush is full of paint. My hand is anchored to the paper and to the table. Okay, I'm going to put just the tip of my brush down, start to pull it. I never stop moving as I push down with the whole belly of my brush. I never stop moving as I come back, release the pressure until it's lifted off of the page. Practice that over and over again, okay? And then when you're comfortable with one of those strokes, and you don't have to go fast, okay? You can go really slow with this. Never stop moving your brush. And as you practice and get more comfortable, then you can start to create variations where it's a little bit thicker, or you're combining two of them together to make something thicker, okay? Where maybe it's a short one like this, maybe it's a really long one like this. Lots of variations, but all of those are thin to thick to thin. Irene said, I love your teaching style. Thanks for teaching this. You've made me understand some techniques I never learned. I love that. That makes me so happy. Watercolor is difficult, and there's a big learning curve at the beginning of it. And we're dealing with lots of water and getting the balance of water right from our brush to our paints to our paper. It can be complicated, but what I really want to come across in this lesson is that it doesn't have to be complicated. You can start simple. And I promise that as long as you're having fun while you're painting, even if it's something simple like these flowers, you're going to learn something from it and gradually start to improve and get better and better. Start combining these into bouquets and into beautiful artworks, gradually improving and getting better and better and better, okay? Remember, if you missed anything earlier, the replay of this class is available as soon as it's over. The same link and the same page, if you hit refresh just a few minutes after class is over, you'll be able to watch it again, okay? Kathy said the tips of my brush strokes aren't sharp like yours. Okay, so I'm guessing, are you talking about these tips here, Kathy? Could be your brush. Are you using a good quality brush? Now, a good quality brush doesn't necessarily mean it's expensive. This brush I'm using is about $5 or $6, so it doesn't have to be very expensive, but you do want your brush to come to a nice point when it's wet. It's okay if your brush is not pointed when it's dry. So this is a brush, when it's dry, it's very fluffy, but as soon as I put water in it, okay, it comes right to a nice sharp point again. So you want your brush to come to a sharp point, and then you want to make sure that your paint is watery enough, right? So if I paint with this nice watery paint, I can have very crisp lines. If I paint with a paint that's too thick, and this happens a lot if you are coming to watercolor from acrylic paint, okay, like this, see, it can be really hard to get that same sharp edge and that same sharp point if you're using a paint that's too dry or your brush is too dry. Remember, it's watercolor, so we need a lot of water in our paint to make sure that it translates really beautifully to the paper. All right. Okay, any other questions, let me know. No problem answering them. Okay, I see Marianne asked, how do you get on the newsletter list? So somebody on my team is going to put the link to that right in the chat, Marianne, so that you can sign up. You just click there and add your name and email address and you'll be added to it. And I send out a newsletter every Friday that has free tutorials, blog posts, a little personal note. I share some of my favorite art supply tools and techniques and tricks. So definitely check out the newsletter. It's just full of great resources. And if you're here and you already get it and you enjoy it, let us know in the chat because I love to hear from you guys. Okay, so super simple, right? Super simple. Of course, my hand and my arm are covered with paint. That's just par for the course. Like I said at the beginning, lots of paper towels on hand. Okay, so super simple. Watercolor does not have to be complicated. It can just be fun. You can set a timer for 20 minutes and say, for 20 minutes, I'm just gonna use that stamping technique with all the different brushes I have and see which ones I like the most, what shapes I like the most, what colors I like the most. How can I add a little bit of contrast on it with some wet on dry details, okay? And I have a really special freebie for you today. It is a whole PDF guide of 5 easy flowers. And I actually can share that here with you. Let me show you what it looks like. Okay, we'll pop a link for this in the chat as well, and it's in the description of the video. And this is a step-by-step guide for how to do lots of different flowers. So here's a way that you can stamp flowers, some wet into wet and lifting, adding details, okay? Lots of loose brush strokes, simple cone flowers, combining them and adding them together. And when you get this free guide, there's a secret 1 hour long video tutorial that puts it all together in a project for you that you can paint along with. So it is a pretty great little guide. Totally free, and I'll have my team drop the link for that into the chat, okay? Donna said, this is off topic, but if I do note cards, do you finish the paper with anything like a spray coating? I don't. You can put it very securely in like a plastic bag with one of those little adhesive strips. That's honestly the best way. I kind of think about it like this. Every time we mail anything, right? Even if it's a handwritten letter, we're kind of trusting that it's not going to get damaged. And 9 times out of 10, it doesn't. It's the same with if we're gonna paint a card, put it in an envelope and send it. If we bought and sent a Hallmark card, it also would get ruined if it was in a rainstorm, and we still trust the process and send it out. So if you're too worried about it, put it in one of those, like it could even be a Ziploc bag or one of those little resealable plastic bags, and that should protect it. But I don't mess around with anything that's too, here's the thing. I like to keep my process very simple. As soon as I start adding a lot of extra things in, extra brushes and extra gimmicks and sprays and adhesives, I get overwhelmed because there's just too many steps. I think watercolor should be simple and fun. Stay with the supplies that are simple, keep things pretty easy, and then it helps us to not get overwhelmed. So I would say you can send it in the mail. Linda said, I don't have a tin to mix colors. Mine is plastic. Mine is plastic too. So this whole one I've been using today, this is plastic. You can use almost anything with watercolor. This is plastic. You can use metal. You can use a plate, like a dinner plate. A lot of people like to go to thrift stores and get deviled egg plates because they have the little divots in them. Makes it great for mixing colors. Okay. Okie dokes. I think that's everything. Is that everything? Cindy said, how's the pup? He has a lot of energy. We rescued a dog about, I don't know, 6 months ago or so, and he's mostly German Shepherd, and he is a ball of energy. Absolutely. He could run outside and chase that ball for like hours and hours and hours and never get bored and apparently never get tired. But super cute. We love him. His name is Charlie. Okay. Thank you guys so much for being here today. I hope you enjoyed it. Relaxed, informal, easy, simple. That's what I was going for today. And I want you to feel like watercolor is approachable. A lot of times we get overwhelmed at our supplies, or we're saving up our supplies for when we feel like we know what we're doing, or we feel like we can use the good stuff. Just go get your supplies wet and start painting. As soon as you start, you're gonna feel that like, oh yeah, I like this. This is relaxing. This is a good use of my time. So go and paint. Join my free Facebook group, and then you can post your paintings in it, and we can see and comment and give you some feedback and lots of encouragement from other people in the community, and it would be great to see what you're painting. All right, thank you so much for being here. The replay will be available as soon as class is over, and I can't wait to see what you paint and create. Goodbye, everybody.